because I'm usually on the other side. So, you know, it's kind of interesting. My name's Shawn. I think most of you might know, some of you don't. Hi, have a seat. There you go. Did you already? So my name's Shawn. I'm one of the partners here at Project 3810. We're a state certified business incubator. We try to provide kind of a full stack of services to startup businesses. What from you literally just started your business last week in your living room and you need somewhere to go to have some services. We have co-working. Then as you kind of progress in your business, okay, I need an office now. We have offices. Maybe, hopefully, if you're like a product-based business and you're selling something and distributing something, we've got warehouse space. And then maybe after that, you kind of graduate to maybe to your own building, into a bigger space or what have you. So that's kind of our role. And this is Global Entrepreneurship Week. And so during this week, every year, we try to do a number of sessions for either business owners or folks that might want to start their own business, and to try to kind of broaden their understanding of like the ecosystem. And this year we thought we would have a civic engagement session because a lot of businesses don't realize how important being civically engaged is, not only to themselves as a citizen, but to their business. Knowing who their representatives are and how to engage with them when you have concerns as a citizen or as a business owner is part of existing in a society like ours. And so we have brought James Cooper, who is the Ward 2 councilperson. So he is the councilperson for the City of OKC for this address, right? So he is as a business owner, he is our council member. So if we have an issue, we can engage with James and say, hey James, this is what's going on, how can you help us, right? If you happen to live in this area as well, then he is your council person as well. But there are resources on the city website to find out who your council person is. If you even live in Oklahoma City or if you live in another city, it's no less important in another city to engage with your city council person. So, for example, I know Christina, you live in Bethany. Bethany has had some troubles lately, but they're trying to fix it. And there's some good people that are working at trying to fix it. So definitely recommend you engage, just as an example. So we just want to kind of be available and kind of have a conversation about some of these things. So, for example, like the first step is just how do you engage, right? What do? I have this problem as a citizen or as a business owner, I need to engage. The first thing is going to be probably email. Every city councilor in the city of Oklahoma City has a generic email address. So like this address is a Ward 2. So ward2@okc.gov gets you James. That's how I got him to come here. As I said, hey James, I'm doing this thing. I'd really love for you to be involved. Can you come help me out? And so James fortunately had some time and has been able to come and be here with us. So that's email. I email my city councilor, who is Jo Beth Hammond, Ward 6. I live downtown. I email her on a regular basis about all kinds of things. Usually it's about buses or bikes or something like that. Most of you know I'm a bike commuter. I bike to this facility every day and back to downtown. It's about 7 miles. Before I did that, I was an everyday bus rider, and then all of that and all of my complaining has got me onto the Maps for subcommittee for connectivity, which is buses and bikes and trails and things like that. So email, first step. As a business, you might have things like, are there economic opportunities for me? Is there help? Is there are there programs? Is there funding? That sort of thing. And I'm going to hand it over to James now. I know he's aware of. We're aware of it as well, but I want to hand it over to James to kind of explain some of those things. We were just talking about one, for example, and then we'll kind of take it from there. And then feel free to ask questions at any time. I don't think we need to do a thing where we just wait for questions at the end. This is meant to be pretty engaging, and so anytime you have a question about topics or even something outside of that, feel free to ask. And James, thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks. That was really useful information. So, hello, every morning. Okay, almost afternoon. Yeah, good morning. So yeah, I'm James Cooper. I have the honor of representing us on City Council here in Ward 2. I live in the Paseo neighborhood. Give you some geographical boundaries here. So Ward 2's southern boundary is 23rd Street. To the east, it's I-235, and then Britain to the north. And then once you're over here on the west side, things get a little wonky.
I think we're right up against it. I think Tulsa Avenue is the boundary here.
It used to be Tulsa, but now it's
Oh, it got
pushed a
moved.
little bit
Right.
to the west to kind of MacArthur, but then
Forgot about
kind
that.
of Ann Arbor. And so it just kind of Grove once upon a time becomes the boundary. But we are the most densely populated ward of the 8 wards. We're nonpartisan, right? So we don't run as Democrats, we don't run as independents, we don't run as Republicans. When our names appear on the ballot, they just appear, you know. That is not to say that we do not, of course, bring our philosophical, perspectives to the way we vote. I mean, people are human, but it's nonpartisan in that way. And then you have a mayor, and the 9 of us together hire what's called a city manager. And that city manager is responsible for stewarding the 5,000 plus employees for the city of OKC. So we hire the city manager. They make around $260,000 a year to do that work, to have the purview over the different city departments. So everything from the airport to police, fire, public transportation, development services, which is where your zoning issues or animal welfare, things like that. So that type of government is called a city manager form of government. And it's kind of important to know. By the way, I hope this part doesn't bore you. It's just that in K through 12, when are they teaching us how
Right,
city
yeah.
government works? So I just don't take for granted that we know that information. I did not know anything that I just shared with you until about 2011. I was finishing my master's work in screen studies in English at OSU, Oklahoma State University. My background was focusing on media violence. I wanted to know what the root causes of real life crime and real life violence were. And that was largely because when I had graduated from high school in Choctaw, Como Park Choctaw Schools as a Midwest City boy, Columbine had happened my junior year. And if you went on the news, Hillary Clinton, John McCain, it didn't matter which political party, they both knew the culprit. It was the Matrix, right? Those 2 kids were wearing, these long coats. So, Keanu Reeves wearing the long coat, the Matrix is responsible. The video game Doom, Mortal Kombat, horror movies, Biggie and Tupac, Punk, Marilyn Manson. I was like, oh my Lord, you were naming everything in my bedroom. And I'm 41 now as of this April Fool's Day, and I still haven't been in a fight. So I was very confused by this argument, right? And so I went to undergrad and grad school to find out what are the actual effects of violent images on our brains. Do they lead to these sorts of outcomes? And if not, which I suspected they weren't, then what is, right? And so, spoiler, they're not. What I found could all be summarized in Stanford economic research that I discovered about 5 years ago when I was running for this seat, and I'll share it with you right now. For every year a kid grows up in a better environment, teen pregnancy goes down, college chances go up, they earn more over their lifetime. They have more stable family environments. For the child who doesn't grow up in the better environment, right, these are places associated with crime, income inequality, segregation, and a lack of social cohesion, a lack of community. That same economic research tells us, however, that we can interrupt that cycle simply by having good government invest in those neighborhoods that have been left behind, right? This to me, after all those years, I heard that, I was like, oh my God, 18 years worth of research condensed into one podcast episode on poverty. I was like, here you go. And so when I ran for office, that was my message. My message was that we could invest in these neighborhoods that had been left behind. And that was how we could address the fact that, as many of you know, Oklahoma, very unfortunately, we have the highest childhood trauma statistics in these United States of America. We've dropped a little bit, but we were number one when I ran in 2018 and 19, number one in what they call adverse childhood experiences. And this is where you take a quiz, 10 different items, right? Food insecurity, domestic violence, whatever these sorts of traumas are, right? And once those traumas start getting to 3 or 4 affirmative answers, the cake starts to be baked for the child as early as 5 years old, and unfortunately it sets them on a path. And that path explains Oklahoma's high incarceration rate. We are number one in incarcerating women, as you know, and incarcerating men, right? And so my argument was, let's literally invest in creating better environments. So this relates to what Shawn was just describing in terms of how city government works. So I had all that research, and I was planning on putting it in an academic book on media violence, but then I was like, well, no one's gonna read that. Maybe NPR does a good review on it, and we'll go from there. But I thought the information was so important that it couldn't just exist within the ivory tower. And so I started looking at how local government worked. And what I learned, and this is important information for you all, is that Oklahoma as a state is unique insofar as we are the only state in the country which restricts all of its cities, Bethany, Edmond, OKC, you name it, Choctaw. We cannot tap into your property tax to pay for the day-to-day operations of the city. So in other words, we can't tap into your property tax for your home to pay the firefighter's salary, the police salary, to go daily resurface your streets. We're the only state in America with that restriction. Every other state has undone that restriction for very obvious reasons, right? So that's one thing you need to know, right? So that's one thing I would recommend advocating to your state house and your state senator, right? Saying, hey, why are we the only state that's doing that? They will likely, depending on their political party, give you the following answer. They'll be like, well, don't you want low taxes and small government? You get what you pay for. You get what you pay for. So if you enjoy these roads and you enjoy your neighborhood's drainage as it is right now, then status quo is what you should keep voting for. If you want to change that, then you need to push your Republican and Democratic state house and senator to change that. There are very powerful forces at play that do not want that. They want their property taxes very low.
The property taxes go to education though, right?
So
At the state level, your property taxes, when you pay in, yes, but education is the purview of the state government. City government does not fund whatsoever your public schools. We don't do that, and so I'm glad you asked that. The other thing I would want you to know about why your roads are so bumpy is from 1974 until 1995, the year of the bombing, we did not use the property tax as we do now. We do have access to your property tax, but we only have access to it every 10 years on the 7s. What we do every 10 years, you've probably voted in these elections, they're called general obligation bond elections. And every 10 years on the 7s since the bombing, we, the City of OKC, come to you with a list of projects: street resurfacing, yes or no, fire stations, yes or no, public transportation, yes or no, libraries, yes or no, drainage, yes or no, economic development, yes or no. So in other words, what the City of OKC has learned is, well, since we can't use it for the day-to-day operations, why not use it, and we don't have these restrictions on us, why not just down the street from you is Portland, right? And that's in our ward. From 36th Street to 23rd Street is gonna get what's called a street enhancement project. This is something that Shawn's gonna be very familiar with over the next 10 years of his life. You might have seen in the news a few weeks ago, a woman was in a wheelchair on Portland in the exact location I just described along Will Rogers Park from 36th to 23rd. She was in a wheelchair, 3 different vehicles, automobiles, hit her in that wheelchair. One of them in a hit and run. She is dead simply because she was trying to access either home, the park, food, retail. I don't know that backstory. I just know that woman is no longer with us. And so, because we did not keep up with investing in walkability or just ADA accessibility, we have created conditions where something like that can happen, right? And it happens all the time. Our pedestrian safety rating is not good in Oklahoma City. And so the bond, the 2017 bond, so 2017 bond called Better Street, Safer City, funded a series of streetscape projects. The streetscape says, okay, we're not just gonna resurface the road, we're gonna redesign the street. We're gonna resurface the street, but then we're also, instead of just putting in sidewalks, then we're gonna put in wider sidewalks. We're gonna look at drainage, we're gonna look at public art, we're gonna look at landscaping. We're going to create a place where people feel comfortable gathering, right? And that's what's coming 36th to 23rd on Portland. The tragedy is, right, it wasn't there in time for this woman. So that's the importance of bond elections. I know it sounds such a boring word, bond, right? But that bond is what's gonna help prevent, not completely do away with, because life is life, but it's a way to help prevent tragedies like the one I just described to you. Belle Isle Library on Northwest Expressway in Villa in our ward, you might have seen, has some renovations to it recently. The bond funded that. You might also be seeing on Northwest Expressway up to Meridian, all the way down to Classen, so that whole stretch there. So think Pruitt's Foods, Integris, Dave & Buster's, Target, the library I just described, the new Oak development, Penn Square Mall, Chick-fil-A, now I'm on Classen, right? Flower Garden Park, New View for the blind, right? The Asian District, all of that. You might have seen recently these fancy new buses that are out there practicing right now. Those are called Bus Rapid Transit. And for the first time in our city's life, we're gonna have reliable public transit that starts next month, 7 days a week, from 7 a.m. in the morning, Monday through Friday, until midnight. I'm sorry, to back up. Monday through Thursday till midnight, 7 a.m. to 6. Might be 6. Go Google Bus Rapid. Until midnight. And then on Friday and Saturdays till 2 a.m. Till 2 a.m. Till 2 a.m. It will arrive every 12 to 20 minutes. And that is an industry standard with public transportation. For a system to actually be reliable, it must arrive 15 minutes or less. It is the only way you're going to get people who have been conditioned to drive a car to say, I have a choice. I can drive my car, or this public transit option can get me there in about the same time or less, right? So this Bus Rapid Transit is training its operators right now to learn the route, how to utilize that route. It will be the first time public transportation has existed on Northwest Expressway, but not the first time that it was on Classen. The Classen median was the streetcar, as you all know. That was John Chartel and Anton Classen 100 years ago when they developed my neighborhood, Paseo, when Putnam developed Putnam Heights, when Military Park, Helm BRT is actually using the old streetcar route, right? So those are just examples of what the bond can fund. If you go to Paseo right now, the streetscape I am promising you coming to Portland is under construction right now in Paseo. That's what that construction is, making it ADA accessible, wider sidewalks, rain gardens to help mitigate drainage concerns. I was just talking with the crew this morning as I was walking over to Holy Rollers for an espresso, and the project manager. Uptown will get a streetscape project. Walker from 23rd to 32nd will get a streetscape project. The 39th Street LGBT district right down the road already got a streetscape project from the bond. That's what the bond did. Maps 4, where Shawn is serving, I won in 2019. Councilwoman Hammond, his councilor, and I, we got to create the sidewalk, bike, trails, and streetlight project in Maps 4. So the city runs on sales tax, not property tax. We know that now, right? So every time you buy something, you are funding the salaries for fire, police, the public safety workers, and these sorts of things. So that's what funds your city government. There's a third pot of money, and that's MAPS. That's the 1 penny sales tax. Started in the early 90s when we finally said we should invest in ourselves. We should actually do that. Our firefighters did not have the equipment that they needed, the personal protective equipment. They were dying in the line of duty in the 80s, and finally, Ward 2 Neighborhood Alliance did a citizens initiative petition to raise the sales tax and dedicate it to public safety, fire, and police. And that's how you actually got the first increase in the sales tax. And once you got that increase, the mayor at the time said, let's do a sales tax for MAPS. Let's do a sales tax for a series of projects we want to fund. We can't go into debt with those projects. We have to accumulate the sales tax revenue first. It's about $140 million a year from that 1 penny. Voters approve in just one vote, yes or no, do you want MAPS? The bond is each project. Do you want libraries, yes or no? Do you want street resurfacing with streetscapes, yes or no? Do you want drainage, yes or no? Do you want these things? MAPS is all just one, up or down. And in MAPS 1, that's how you got the ballpark, the canal, the river got dammed up, so you have a river. MAPS 3 is streetcars, Civic Park, 4 senior wellness centers. But with MAPS 4, when Joe Beth and I won, we said we want to undo the let's drive really, really quickly, let's have streetscapes. Let's build on better streets. So Clara Looper corridor from I-35 to 235 on 23rd. Capitol Hill, Stockyards, Ward 2's Windsor District, Ward 2's Britain District. All of those are gonna have streetscapes over the next 10 years with input from the residents and businesses around there to determine what are the infrastructure needs. So Shawn is kind of a big deal. Shawn is literally one of the people that the mayor has appointed to oversee that work. So Shawn's actually going to be one of the people working with the people in those neighborhoods and with the planning and public works staff in the MAPS 4 office to implement this stuff. So that's the next 10 years of our lives. So again, MAPS funds things with the penny sales tax. Your sales tax funds the day-to-day operations. And every 10 years on the 7s, you get your property tax, which means 2027 is right around the corner. But guess what? You're ahead. And we'll have a bond election in 2025. So that is your opportunity to work with Shawn. I can't stress enough. I know these were lengthy remarks. I won't have any more remarks. I'll just have questions that you have for me. But this is really, I think, your opportunity to work with Shawn, to think about the infrastructure needs in your neighborhood and to advocate them to him, to the Ward 2 account that he described. But I think in terms of economic development, for too long we have a philosophy that said, let's invest in Amazon or a big business coming to our city. Let's give them revenue to come here, and that will trickle down and create jobs. I have a different philosophy. My philosophy is you have to improve the conditions in people's neighborhoods. You have to invest in these old Main Street corridors with the hope that small businesses take up there, that serve the people around there, to create those better environments in Stanford and
lean into, there's a portion of today's agenda that talks about volunteer opportunities. This is an excellent time to shunt that into what Jamie said, because, so I'm a volunteer, right, for the Task Force Subcommittee. The city needs volunteers for all sorts of things, including usually some of these bond projects. A lot of times they'll have citizen advisory councils, and they'll take citizenry from, like, usually your city representative can put, like, if you send an email and say, hey, I want to help, what can I do? Your city councilor can put your name in the hat to be considered for some of these volunteer committees and whatnot. And those all kind of get run up against everything, and then the mayor sends you a letter that says, I have appointed you to be on this committee, please come join us. And so I mentioned earlier, starting engagement is, sending that email and, continuing to provide feedback to the council. Because a lot of times they're up there on the horseshoe and they're making some assumptions about what their citizenry want based off the feedback they're getting. But if the feedback they get is not fully representative of the community they serve, how are they going to know? Right? You've got to tell them. These are the things that I'm concerned about. Please factor that into your decisions. And so, but they can't do everything. They can't be on all these committees themselves. There's not enough time in the day. So that's where citizens like myself and like you guys can be involved, get on some of these committees, be an additional representative to the folks in your wards, that sort of thing. And then, as far as that advocacy goes, we talked about advocating for your business, but what a lot of businesses don't realize is that, and James kind of alluded to it, advocating for your environment is advocating for your business. Okay. So, for example, Portland was supposed to get a bike lane from 10th Street to 23rd Street. It's something that had been on the books for a long time that we're going to do. And then when they went to engage with businesses there, we had no idea that was a thing that would have been decided because they were not engaged. The businesses all said, no, we don't want the bike lanes on this street. And so the city canceled that project. But what they don't realize is that if they had let that project happen, there's economic opportunity that comes from that by giving that accessibility, by opening access to other people in the city that maybe don't have cars or don't have the ability to get places. Those bike lanes are honestly not just bike lanes, they're mobility lanes. So the person in the wheelchair or a person on a scooter, whether it's a Lime scooter or a scooter that you need to assist you in moving around just in general, a medical device scooter, those bike lanes are mobility lanes. So you by having those lanes in more places, it may seem like it's an adverse impact to traffic if you're losing a car lane, for example, but a lot of times those lanes aren't in full use. One lane of traffic is designed to carry 10,000 cars per day. And even a place, you might think, if I asked you, what's the busiest corridor in the city, aside from something like Northwest Expressway, you might say something like 23rd and Classen. Well, when they measured the traffic counts for the BRT that James mentioned, it was 27,000 a day at 23rd and Classen. Okay, so yes, right there, 3 lanes is justified. But everywhere else they measured along Classen, 10,000, 11,000, doesn't really even justify 2 lanes, much less 3 lanes. So that's why one of those lanes was taken away and used as a bike lane. It may seem bad, but you know what? I ride that lane every single day coming to work. And I have not seen any kind of, I've ridden it at 7 a.m., I've ridden it at 8 a.m., I've ridden it at 9 a.m. I have not seen any kind of backup or major clogging happening. Life is going on. It's moving on like normal. So quite possibly that same thing would have happened on Portland between 10th and 23rd. 36th Street is on the Black Walk OKC plan to eventually have a tier 1 facility, meaning a dedicated bike lane, meaning we might go down to like two lanes in either, or 1 lane in either direction and a center turn lane, which is really there have been studies that show that 3 lanes, meaning one being the center turn lane, is more efficient than 4 lanes that are 2 in each direction. So this is one of those places where we could advocate for. Here, for example, we need that bike lane. We want people from other parts of the city to be able to come here to this place and maybe not have to drive, or maybe getting here is a thing they can now do because they couldn't drive before and they don't have to now, that sort of thing. So, sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a general question. I know there's been a lot of talk so far about public investment in have to consider from a business and entrepreneurial standpoint, distribution and transportation is secondary to production. So James, you made a comment earlier when you were talking about the uses of bonds to be able to improve this transportation and different areas of our ward. You then said with the hope of other businesses wanting to come in. So my question then is, what are the municipal incentives for businesses to actually start and begin producing, so that way then they can utilize the actual transportation systems here?
It's a good question, and it was literally the conversation we were having just right, like literally right as this was beginning. So again, the problem from my perspective, and again, this goes back to the nonpartisan conversation I had. I said we're nonpartisan, we are nonpartisan, but people bring their philosophies to the table. And at that table, for all of the cities, since Stanley Draper arrived in Oklahoma City in the 1920s, and you can read the book Boomtown to really get a fuller picture of this, it's about OKC history. When Stanley Draper arrived here in the 1920s and started working to create this new Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Chamber of Commerce for Oklahoma City, the argument was we should use the tax dollars to incentivize a big business to come to Oklahoma City. And in using those tax dollars, that big business would create jobs. And that's the reason why you have that economic incentive. So let me give you a very crystal clear example of this, so this is not abstract. You might recall, and this is the story we always hear, in the early 90s, we were gonna bring, I believe it was American Airlines, United Airlines, here to Oklahoma City. Now remember, we hadn't passed a bond during the 80s, from 74 to 95, so no bond. It took a citizens initiative petition to get the city to actually raise its sales tax for fire and police, and only fire and police, right? So then Mayor Norick was like, well, if the city has now shown itself willing to invest in fire and police by raising its sales tax, then with United wanting to come here, let's now vote for sales tax increase again to give to the airline so that they will come here, create jobs, even bring workers here. They said no. Like the voters said yes.
Oh.
No.
You're right. Voters said yes.
The voters said yes, that sounds great. That's in line with our economic philosophy. Come here. United said no. And why? You know the story. They said the quality of life. They said you're not walkable. We stopped investing in sidewalks right after World War II. Stopped requiring the building of sidewalks. They said, how are people going to walk around? They said, where's your bike infrastructure? You have no reliable public transportation. You don't have restrooms in your parks. You don't have youth centers. You don't have senior centers. Like, what are you giving these workers in terms of their literal quality of life? We said we have the suburbs, right? And that was literally it. And so they said no. And that's what led Ron Norick to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, if voters are already willing to raise the sales tax for bringing United here, let's invest in quality of life things. And that's how you got the canal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we've done it ever since. I would suggest to you that right now there are very limited economic opportunities from the city level.
Well, the bond projects, both 2017, MAPS 4, and probably the next one, they all have economic development dollars in them.
Right. But those are very new. We are living through, the chamber likes to say renaissance. We're in a renaissance. And that is true. Now, some of my progressive friends, of which I am one, don't like this word. But I think they don't like it because there's a misunderstanding of what a renaissance is. A renaissance, you recall, during the Italian times, I always teach Boomtown with my students with an Italian Renaissance documentary. Like they compare and contrast Florence to OKC. They're finishing that right now. I think I had this misunderstanding too. A renaissance is not just like, woohoo, look at all the beauty and the growth. A renaissance has a backlash attached to it also, right? Remember, they burned their own renaissance art barely a couple years into it, right? And so we're experiencing that but it's a messiness, and it's not until maps that we've been in this renaissance, this rebirth of the idea that we should invest in ourselves. That's what you're living through. And so to Shawn's point, the 2017 bond was really the first time that we had this economic development package in there that started to say, what if we set aside $10 million for workforce affordable housing? You could never have done that in the mid-90s with the bond. There's no way that would have happened. So that's there. So what do I want to do in the next bond? I want an economic incentive package in there. We have a $1.2 billion housing need. We have 19,400 Oklahoma Cityans right now. I'm not talking about homeless people. I'm talking about teachers, social workers, etc. 19,400 Oklahoma Cityans in need of 1 to 2 bedroom housing. We only have 3,600 of those units available. So the supply is not meeting the demand. We're the 20th largest city now in America. We're the 6th fastest growing. We grew by 100,000 residents over the last 10 years. We don't have enough housing. So what I'd like to do in the next bond is say, okay, 1.2 billion, can't do that. An entire bond is about $1 billion. But how could we set aside several millions of dollars? Personally, I'd like 100 or so at least, to say, what if we invested in housing that was mixed use? Or if there were incentives for developers who understood urban infill, right? That said, what if you had ground level retail with 1 or 2 stories worth of housing above it, so you have the small business opportunity here, and maybe the small business that after I graduated from the incubator school here, not school, I'm just giving that as language, like after I moved through this process and now I want a brick and mortar of my own, well, what if there were these places like how the Paseo was designed 100 years ago, or how Capitol Hill was designed 100 years ago, or Britain was designed 100 years ago? What if you incentivize developers to build those sorts of mixed-use developments, right? So that's one thing I want to pull off there. But right now, there's just really not the sort of money. The only real opportunity that the city has passed recently was a couple years ago, and we were just talking about it, but I get excited about it. It's called KIVA, K-I-V-A, and this is for small businesses run by traditionally marginalized groups. So this could be minorities, this could be women, and let me make this concrete and not abstract. My friend Michaela, she had this vision she described to me 2 years ago at a Christmas party. She said, and I just met her that night, she goes, I'd like to have an antique store that had taxidermy, and I would call it Beloved Bones. And I was like, girl, I don't know what you were talking about, but I'm here to support your vision. That sounds wonderful. And she's like, yeah. And then, I was like, okay. And she was like, and then I would like for it part-time to be a music venue. And I was like, okay, you have just accelerated into a place that I do not understand. But again, great. That sounds wonderful, Michaela. That was Christmas 2 years ago. She applied for the KIVA program without me even telling her. She had already found it on her own. And I was like, oh my God, really? Because I was skeptical that it would work when we passed it at council, that it would connect with the people it needed to, but Michaela found it. Literally the next summer, last year, 2022 in July, that Christmas party was my best friend Austin's Christmas party. We worked together at Blockbuster back in Midwest City days. Austin was in the metal. Well, he had a band that last July, not this one, but 2022, their album came out, God's Country. And when it came out, suddenly it was appearing on Album of the Year list, and guess who hosted their debut? Beloved Bones. Beloved Bones. The Sanctuary was what the venue part of their place was called. There are photos of us uncorking champagne. These boys are right now on a three-week tour across the western part of this country. I went to Copenhagen with them this summer to go see elevated bike lanes. Yeah, I know. That's why I went. my nerdy little friends like Shawn here have been talking about Copenhagen for years. They've given me books called Copenhagenized. And so when my best buddies went to Copenhagen for their metal tour, I was like, I gotta go support them, but I wanna go see this infrastructure too. Beloved Bones. And by the way, when those photos were on Instagram of Beloved Bones Sanctuary posting them that day, like that was the same day that Beyonce's Renaissance came out, and Pitchfork and Stereo Gum were sharing photos from Oklahoma City from the sanctuary that was only possible because of Kiva. We need to better connect our people to Kiva, and we need more programs like Kiva, and that is what I am absolutely dedicated to heading into this next bond. More streetscapes, more economic opportunities for people traditionally and historically disconnected. And if we're not intentional about this work, if we don't tell people Michaela's story, if Michaela's not telling people her story, then shame on us.
We've been talking about taxes and your sources, the sources of funding. So Oklahoma payroll tax, where does that go?
Not to us, to my knowledge.
What bucket does that get put into?
All I know is that the city of Oklahoma City only has access to sales taxes to
Right.
pay for things, and sometimes property taxes. I presume that goes to the state. But I
Right.
don't know.
So, I mean, as a longtime employer of people, and all my years of trying to say I want incentives, our biggest expense, hands down, is payroll.
Am I
And if
wrong?
we can get, and I don't know who we need to talk to, but payroll incentives are way more valuable than income tax incentives.
That's really interesting. You're actually reminding me, gosh, it's so weird how things that were so important at one time can just completely be erased from one's memory. I feel like in the aftermath, correct me if I'm wrong, everything else I just said I'm certain of. But am I wrong? I feel like after the Great Recession in 2008, did the Obama administration pause the payroll tax to help alleviate some of the concerns? I want to say at the federal level, there was a pause in the payroll, or at the very least, if
I
there
don't
were-
remember that, and we definitely had employees at that
Y'all
time.
might Google that, 'cause I'm almost certain if the end of that.
There was some benefits, I mean, and like what happened with COVID was all wrong, in the way that recovery happened as far as like, increasing unemployment for no reason.
Well,
But, anyway,
Well, one thing that, out of COVID that has benefited things is that now, today, the city, this is one of the more recent things that's happened, the city has ARPA funds that it can distribute to
True.
to businesses. So that is one positive thing, and it's a way for businesses to receive funding for certain types of projects.
yeah, and he did. It was in 2012, he signed payroll tax cuts. I used to be an opinion editor when I was at Stillwater, and I just followed federal politics like surgically back then, and I remembered that because that was your argument was the argument. It's like, hey, we can
Yeah.
give economic relief. Going back to COVID, let me tell you something that is very important, and it's to Shawn's point. I authored a resolution, and this was where suddenly we were partisan, not because of me. I created a resolution saying that this was in May of 20. So no mask ordinance, no vaccine, but in May of 20, I came to believe that just like our firefighters did not have the personal protective equipment that they needed in the 80s here, neither did our healthcare workers in 2020. And so I authored a resolution, it's not binding, but I said, the City of OKC Council believes that the next federal relief package should have 3 things in it. 1, money for mass testing and contact tracing. Remember, we were short testing kits at the time. I was like, we need to manufacture those right now with the Defense Production Act. Number 2, I said, we needed personal protective equipment, right, for our people in healthcare. 3, this was the one that got me into a little bit of trouble. I said, we are shutting down our economy, and if we're going to do that, then the federal government needs to, as we're going through this, give us revenue at the city level to make up for our lost revenue. 3 things I said, and we barely passed that resolution. Mayor wasn't there that day, but it barely passed on a split vote, and my conservative federal government knows better are the needs than we do at the local level. And I said, am I a conservative suddenly right now? Because I am saying that we at the local level better understand our needs. It was wild. It was like Alice through the looking glass moment. It passed, but there was never a federal package again until the Biden administration. And they, with Mayor Holt's advocacy, passed exactly what I was talking about. So we now have revenue that we've been able to put toward preparedness in terms of a future pandemic, but also making up for some of our lost revenue in some other ways. What we learned, and this was very clever, we reconfigured some of the economic development dollars from the previous bond. We reconfigured them into forgivable loans for small businesses, grants, and this was the surprise to me. If you had told me, as they did at the time, we're going to do those three things, I was more in favor of giving small businesses loans, grants that were forgivable. I didn't understand technical assistance. It turns out the technical, I'd gotten it wrong. The technical assistance, and we were just talking about this right before, was the most important. Because what we learned was that a lot of, too many of our small businesses are really good at the products, they know their products, they have their vision, but they didn't have a lot of the administrative part of it, the payroll, the this and that. And so suddenly when they had $100,000 to go to better understanding how to do that sort of administrative work, right? Now it's stabilized them. It allowed them to go, wait, okay, thank you, I now know better the administrative part. And so I would hope that in the next bond, we put more money into that sort of technical assistance side of things so that we are better able to help the person who does have the entrepreneurial idea. Or how do we connect them to places like here, right? So that they better understand, okay, the example I gave Shawn is like, what if I were a drag queen and, no one's ever taught me how an I-9 works. So I may be doing drag performances all across the city, but this restaurant might be not paying me my worth because I don't know my worth, like in terms of economic worth, right? But what if I have another vision? It's like, well, I want to do drag, but I want to sell jewelry, I want to sell wigs, I want to do makeup, right? So I've got all this creativity, but I don't know how to do an I-9, I don't know taxes, I don't know any of that sort of stuff. So what if we at the city level said, okay, well, you've got a vision, we're gonna help connect you with people like Shawn, the Metro Techs, right, the career techs, we're gonna Akiva programs, right, whatever bond package, economic incentives we have, we're gonna connect you and your vision to this sort of stabilizing small business infrastructure. I'm still working all that out. I'm gonna use all of 2024 to be bringing people like Shawn to the table, Metro Techs to the table, Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce to the table, who again have that different vision of top down, but I've already been talking to them about how do you invest in the bottom up.
With that bottom up in mind, it's an old military saying that the army runs on its stomach, and the populace of a municipality is no different. More population density means more mouths to feed, but as a permaculturalist and longtime gardener, you can take a square foot and cut out a lot of the needs for nutrition and food insecurity that Oklahoma experiences, about 14 change percentage. What are the different zoning options that are actually in place at this larger bond level to allow an apartment complex, a church, a street sidewalk, to actually be producing edible landscapes that can actually feed this populace so they can have the business idea in the first place? Because we're still back to, we can't be worrying about distribution and transportation when there's no product or service to distribute.
It's not a thing for the bond issue. However, it is definitely something you should be feeding back to your city council representatives. The city, for at least 4 years, maybe longer, has been trying to, it's been arguing amongst itself, it's been trying to revamp its code on a big way.
The zoning development.
Zoning code. Which includes land use, okay? Which includes density, includes setbacks. Right now, if you wanted to build a house, you are not legally allowed to build a house that took up your entire property. Like you wanted to maximize your property and have a building that was taking up whatever, you cannot do that. You have to have a setback from the street. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have a setback, but right now the setback's pretty large. There's no provisions for things like keeping like homeowners associations from requiring you to have a lawn, for example. Like if you're in a certain neighborhood and your homeowners association says you have to have grass, you have to have a lawn, that's non-productive land. There's nothing that allows the city to say, no, you know what, you can't do that. You have to let them do these other things, to make it more productive land, whether it's a garden or whether it's just xeriscape where it's not unproductive. And then there are things like housing density. The city's trying to improve that. With it, there are certain zones and that kind of thing there are certain areas of the city that would be, higher density. There's nothing getting rid of like rural versus suburban versus urban, but specifically trying to get some increased density. And so density is part of the calculus that like factors in things like tax dollar per square acre or whatever. Like if a resident at 174th and Portland, which is I think still the City of OKC City, has access to the same services as somebody who's down in their urban core. Not that they shouldn't have access to those services, so much as that the funding of that needs to change a little bit, because it costs more to do it at 174th and Portland than it does in the urban area because there's more infrastructure down there, right? And so these are some of the things that need to go into that code change. And the city's been trying. There have been just last year. There was a code change workshop, a series of public meetings that happened at various libraries and that sort of thing to kind of educate folks on the types of things that they're working on. I've been hoping for many years that it would have passed already, because there are certain provisions that I want to see happen, such as allowing accessory dwelling units in backyards, so that somebody can build a housing unit in their backyard. If you go to a city like Houston that doesn't have some of these restrictions, almost every backyard in Houston has 1 or 2 ADUs. And so I went and hung out with some friends in 2018, and every one of them lived in an ADU in someone's backyard because it was more affordable, right? And so we need, as James described, we need thousands of affordable housing units for people, and there's just nowhere to put them. There's land, but most of that available land is in more suburban areas. In the urban areas where there is land, you literally are not allowed by law, by the zoning code, to build multifamily housing on certain types of land in certain ways. And even though the city has a comprehensive plan that says that we favor these forms of density and that sort of thing, it's non-binding. And so even though it's the city's plan, someone can literally, a developer can literally try to build a multifamily type of housing in a neighborhood, and the neighborhood can protest to the planning commission, and the planning commission can deny that denser housing because of their opinions, which contradict the comprehensive plan that the city itself created. And so they're trying to codify some of those things to make them more binding into the municipal code. I don't know when that stuff's going to happen for real. I don't know when the elections are going to happen, but I know it's being worked on.
Yeah, that was a really good description. I would encourage you, if that is a topic, if you're interested in like making sure that we are zoning in such a way that allows us to preserve the rural. I know that might shock, it's always interesting to me, like, here I am in truly the most densely populated part of the city than the other wards, and I am a big urbanist, right? But I think it shocks some people whenever I'm like, yeah, but I want to preserve our agriculture. So what's zoned agricultural around the peripheral part of the city, the farmland, the country? I don't want development out there. That makes me sad. I want to preserve that land. It makes me very, very sad to see developers building 1-story, 2-story homes, like what I grew up in out on Southeast 15th and Anderson, out at 220th and Portland. That breaks my heart in a million pieces. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm in Paseo.
Okay.
And the historic
Preservation Commission?
Yeah, so the question is, we are one of the few cities that have that. It's usually regulated to a PDF.
Yeah.
I've got the city coming over and multiple fines on these guys.
Mm.
I've got them going to Angela going, what can we do? And them saying nothing. So they're in essence holding this house hostage. So I don't understand, and I've got multiple properties there. I was never asked to sign anything when John Bell passed that. And like on that, street sign that is put in front of the tower, that is a major issue. I don't know how that got put in there.
Mhm.
We're like 100 foot from the corner, and people just block Walker when that thing is, so I don't understand how the sale is operating there.
So the historic preservation, it actually goes back to the ADU conversation. And this is, again, I'll try and make it as non-complicated as possible, but it is a bit complicated insofar as that when we weren't passing bonds in the 60s and 70s, the city government was really allowing developers to tear down a lot of these historic homes in neighborhoods like ours, or in Heritage Hills, Nesta Park. They were just going in, the goal, they were just like, God can tear it down, I can build whatever I want. So we weren't preserving our city's history. And moreover, the city government itself was destroying, as you know, our old skyscrapers and buildings as part of what was called urban renewal. We'll destroy these, quote, blighted buildings, and we'll build you the city of the future, which you never got. So what happened was some residents in the 70s said, enough's enough. And very specifically, one of the moments was the city was proposing that Robinson, along Good Home Park, Robinson was going to become essentially like a bit of a freeway to connect you to Edmond. And the residents said, that's it. Like, no, we're not doing this. And so these HP protections became a way to preserve the integrity of the neighborhoods, or the history of these homes, etc. And I think that was good on the one hand. Where I have a problem with it is as follows. One, and Shawn really nailed it with like the ADUs, for instance. If you look at Heritage Hills, if you look at Nesta Park, if you look at so many of the HP neighborhoods that we built 100 years ago, they have Shawn's vision. They have ADUs in the backyard. So if I own that home, right, I now have an ADU that I can rent out, and I can use that money to help me with my mortgage, right? That's how it was designed. The HPs prevent the building of the ADUs going forward. What? Why? And people in some of those HPs, so in other words,
We're not HP anymore, we've changed to
Oh, no.
historic landmark.
Well, I mean-
That's what I'm asking.
well,
Go
even
back to that.
my understanding, I think Paseo is in HP. I'd have to go
Historic
look.
landmark, they kind of switched a little bit, cause I owned that church and I
Mhm.
had
Which church?
different things. I owned
The one at
Trinity.
Which one?
The white one?
Oh, they're on across from 612.
Yes.
Yeah. So these restrictions literally prevent us from doing ADUs, and some of your battle is actually with your neighbors. You have neighbors, I've spoken with them, who do not want ADUs because they believe it drives down their property values. There's no science to that, there's no data that supports that, but they're, even in this moment with the code update, pushing back against that. They're like, we don't want these ADUs. And my counter argument is like, show me the data where that's bad, and I will hear it. But there is no data that says that. And then the other thing too is, I make $60,000 a year as a teacher combined with my council income. I can't buy a home in Edgemere, Putnam Heights, Paseo, Nesta Park, any of those places, because the cost is so much. But if I had an ADU behind it, right, I could use that to mitigate that cost. Or my mother, who is 79, could live behind me and I could help take care of her. But right now, these zoning restrictions keep us from being able to do that. So I'd like to see those ADUs. I'd also window just like this, or you have to do this roof just like that. Well, if you're making $30, $40, $50, $60,000 a year, how are you able to afford to live in that neighborhood and do that sort of work? You can't. And so I actually have some issues with some of the HP regulations as well. My advice to you would be to email the ward with what your concerns are, and I can forward that immediately and connect you specifically.
Well, I don't own a house, I just live next door to it, and I've watched them struggle with this thing for a year and a half.
All the same, it goes back to how we began in the first place. Your experience, and this just goes for all of you, your experience, what you're seeing, it is important that you, if you feel appropriate, comfortable doing so, like if you were to email me and say, here are my thoughts, or you don't even have to say, here are my thoughts, I want to share those immediately with the people in charge of this code update. So you have a consultant we've hired to do the code update, they're working with the planning director. So I can connect you immediately to them, and you can give your perspective on, hey, here's my concerns about the way HP is operating, or HL, and here are my suggestions. Now, that doesn't mean they're gonna take them all, but they need to hear those things from you, because if they don't hear them from you, you know what I mean? They have no way of knowing. So it's just very,
Move
very
forward
important.
with assumptions that may or may not be true.
That's right. So I can't stress enough to you, like, if you feel comfortable, send that email, and I am more than happy to connect you with Marilyn, who's the consultant, or the project manager with us, and with the planning director, so you can share those. And it might even end up that when I connect you with them, that maybe that involves you all sitting down for, a meeting, or it's a phone call or something. But no, they need to hear from property owners in there.
Or just even residents.
Or residents.
We've got homeless setting up in there. I mean,
Mhm.
it's bad.
Yeah, I would.
And I've called Action Line, they'll come out and fine them. But it's real hard to redo a house when they're saying you can't do anything. They only meet 4 times a year.
No, I just can't stress enough how important it is that you connect with them so that they hear your voice. That's the only way.
And when you do that, I would note all those Action Center tickets as well. Like, this is all part of, this all factors into it.
It's ridiculous. I mean, you just think, okay, the city's keeping you from doing something, but the city's fining the tar out of you.
Well, my grave concern, if I'm being very honest with you all, so that's why I appreciate both of your questions, like big time. My grave concern for all of my excitement for what's happening in Paseo right now, truly I am tickled pink every morning to like walk and go
I'm
see that
thrilled
work.
too. I mean,
But my worry is that as we do those infrastructure investments, that we actually raise the property value to such an extent that what about all the workers who are the baristas, the servers in that area, the people who've been renting? When I moved to Paseo in 2010, my then boyfriend and I had a 1-bedroom apartment for $530. That was 2010. This is not inflation. This is wrong. You now have rentals for the same 1-bedrooms at well over $1,000. And that would be fine if there were also in that same marketplace some sort of range of $500, $600, $700, $800, but that's not happening. So that's why I want to use the next bond to dramatically incentivize developers to build those 1 to 2 bedroom homes on infill lots that we know exist in the Paseo and all across the city. Build these homes, right, so that we can add to the supply. It's basic capitalism. You add to the supply, you drive down the cost. But until we do that, I have recurring nightmares right now, truly recurring nightmares about suddenly not being able, just not being in my apartment anymore, just not being there, being in an apartment, all my bags and stuff are still packed, but I'm someplace else. I'm like, oh my God, I've been priced out of my, and I'm not kidding, this is a recurring nightmare I have had 36 times in the last year, I don't know. And it's because I see the same homelessness that you do, and I see the property values and these sorts of things. So no, we have got to get it right in terms of how do you protect the integrity, the history of our historic neighborhoods? Absolutely. How do we make sure that people's property values do rise? Because you all deserve it, you put in that work. But simultaneously, how do we make sure that we are not pricing out the middle and working middle class of this city that has historically not been invested in and has all the childhood traumas that they've grown up as adults without having, those mental health services to stabilize their lives. So you too, these sorts of things that you're saying and asking, it is so wonderful to hear, and I think it's important for you all to connect to the city departments and share those complexities. If they don't hear from you, then they'll take for granted.
Oh, yeah. And we've experienced that even just on, I've been on this MAPS 4 subcommittee for almost 2 years now, and there are times where we don't have feedback, we have to make certain assumptions moving forward. And then we had a neighborhood come in, and after we had decided something, came in like to the next meeting and said, well, wait, hold on a second, you guys decided something last week, and we didn't get, and even though there's all these different updates from the cities, everybody's got so many things to pay attention to, it's really hard to hone in on the things that are going to impact you. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and redo some things, plans-wise, that were going to happen in that neighborhood. And so we definitely need that feedback. Sure. And we're kind of over. I apologize for that. And I'm not sure if you have something immediately after this, but unless there's any final questions, we should probably wrap it up. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
I'm here.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thanks for your economic development questions too, because those were very useful. And that's going to help shape what I'm able to do.
And I'm here anytime, so if anybody else has any other
I'm gonna
things,
run it
I
back.
could talk to you all day about it. So.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
y'all.
I'm on Instagram, by the way, James for OKC, if you need to keep up with what we're doing. And then in terms of homelessness, on my City of OKC website, like for me as a council person, we hosted, some of you might have already went, but on November 1st at Tower, I hosted a homelessness meetup. We had about 400 people attend, and I gave opening remarks, and then it was presentations and like a Pecha Kucha rapid fire sort of approach. But they gave presentations 7 minutes each on service providers, it was city staff, about where we are, how we got here, and then there were panel conversations. And we had a professionally made video from the House Creates that they created for us that is now on my City of OKC website. I actually just shared it with a good friend of mine this morning. If you want to understand homelessness and what we're finally, for the first time, the city's never invested in homelessness services, ever. This is the first year we've ever done that, ever. And we have a 2-year plan right now to reduce chronic homelessness by 75% using the consultant who helped Houston reduce their homelessness population by 64% over the last few years. So Clutch is the name of that consultant, and we've hired them. Go on my page, watch that video, and then figure out how can you plug in to help us, because it is truly going to be an all hands on deck for the next 2 years to start getting us out of this situation. If you can't find that video, let me know, and I'm happy to text it to you. But especially if you're happy where you are, it might be something that we need to connect you to the street outreach team so that you can build a relationship with them.
I think if they would just let them finish the house, that would be a big one.
I would just go ahead and just send an email to us so we can connect you
I
with,
mean,
with everybody.
it's ludicrous. We're almost at 2 years.
This is
I
why I
can't
took
believe
therapy
you
every
haven't
2
been
weeks.
contacted, because I told them to call you.
No.
Number 28. Because they're not getting anywhere. I mean,
But go ahead and get them over to me and